Hey everybody, this is Josh for another episode of the Solopreneur Grind Podcast. Very happy to be joined by John from Think It, Be It. John, thanks so much for coming on the show, and if you don't mind just starting with a little bit more about yourself and what you're working on these days.
Josh, thank you. I'm proud to be here, and I think a lot of your audience is going to find what we're going to talk about interesting, but I dare say some of them are going to find it life-changing. And so I give you a little background on my story. So I became an entrepreneur when I was 30. I started out as a CPA, and by the time I got to be 30, I decided that I didn't want to be an accountant all my life. And so in my 30s and 40s, I was in like 7 different businesses. But when I got to be 50, I just wasn't as successful as I thought I should be. And Josh, I had 2 goals in my life. The first one was make enough money so I didn't have to work. And the second one was to find the one of my dreams. And so on the money, I always did pretty well as an entrepreneur. I made 200 grand a year typically. But as materialistic as this sounds, I realized at 50, for me to have the exceptional life I always dreamed of, I had to net $1 million a year. I'm just doing the math. And on the girl at 50, I'd never been married, although I got to say I did a lot of interviewing. Well, I called it interviewing. My friends called it begging, but I prefer interviewing. But so at 50, I'm like puzzled. Well, how do I change that? And so I am laying in bed one night, and it's like 3 months after I turned 50, and a pearl of wisdom comes to me. Find the top book of the world on success and apply that book literally word for word to my life. So I'm thinking, that's a pretty good idea. So I jump out of bed and I do the research. And what I discover sort of blows me away. I find that there's one book that's been read by 150 million people. And it's the top book of the world on success by a factor of 10. And that book is Think and Grow Rich, which I bet you've read, right?
Yep. It's a
And so
classic.
it truly is a classic. And I'm like, wow, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I can't believe it's setting up so perfectly. So the next day I go out and I buy the book and I read the book. And Josh, then I discover the problem. The book says there's a secret for success, but the author only gives us half of the secret. It's on the reader to figure out the other half. Well, I'm bummed. I moped around for probably 3 weeks. And one day, Josh, I just wake up and go, come on, John, just man up and figure out the damn secret. And so I read the book probably 20 times over a 2 to 3 month period of time and ultimately figure out the full secret and a 12-minute a day technique to apply it. And so I started applying it to a new business I was starting in the reverse mortgage field. And Josh, suddenly my income starts doubling and doubling and doubling to where, like, approximately 4 years later, I'm netting 25 times the 200 to 300 grand a year I was making the prior 20 years. And of course, I felt so incredibly blessed. But Josh, what was really cool was I could see why it was happening. I was just playing the game of life at a higher level. I could do things I could never do before. And I just had a level of control over myself I'd never experienced before. And so, and this is about 10 years ago, finally, I had enough money so I didn't have to work. And I decided, okay, I'm going to share this with the world. And a few months after I sold my company, I met the former chancellor and president at the University of Texas here in Austin and told him my story. And he says, hey, you got to teach this in Texas, and why don't we teach it together? And that led to him introducing me to the athletic director who said, hey, I want to learn this 12-minute a day technique. And that led to becoming the mental coach for the 18 head coaches here at the University of Texas. And so today I teach my methodology to students and athletes in a course called The Science of Success, the Science of Leveraging Yourself. And I teach it to adults through my book and also licensing my methodology through coaches. So that's essentially what I do.
Usually when someone answers a question, I have like one or two questions I want to dive into next. And now my head is just exploding because there's, a couple dozen ways we could take this. The first thing that comes to my mind, John, is there's some listeners that we have out there that maybe even haven't pulled the trigger yet on entrepreneurship, or, maybe they are working hard, but they're only making $50K a year, and your $200K a year actually sounds like a lot. Do you have any general tips on the basics for getting started, and even for those people who want to get to that 200K? Or is the answer here like, hey, don't even think about what I did to get to 200K. Let's just focus on the new system?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that as I look back on my career, becoming an entrepreneur at 30 was the best decision I ever made, irrespective of whether I made big money or not. Just as you know, the joy is having control over your life, right? And so I think the challenge is always to figure out what to launch into to be an entrepreneur, but have the courage to do it. And one thing I would say to your audience that may be helpful is just think about this. How do you create success in your life? Just think about that. How do you create success in your life? And Josh, when I'm with people one-on-one, I'll ask them that question. And oftentimes they've never been asked that question. So they'll sort of stumble around for the answer. And then the more pertinent question is, well, how's that working for you? How's that working for creating the exceptional life? Well, not so good, obviously. And what I see is that most people are just winging life. They don't really have a way of doing life. They're just getting up, doing the best they can. And the effect of winging life is they keep on recreating their past because they have nothing pulling them forward to their desired life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can certainly relate because I've had, ups and downs in my career as well. And partially it's been catching myself and realizing I was just kind of flowing with the wind, right? Without much planning and stuff like that. So I can definitely relate. So what would you say would your first one or two action items or suggestions be for other people?
Well, the short answer is stop winging life. And that's what I'm going to explain how to have an actual way of doing life. But let's dig into this idea just a little. So as human beings, we all have two fundamental problems we have to overcome. The first one is that we are innately wired for survival, which causes the vast majority of our thoughts to be fear-based and causes us to be reactive. So that's problem number one. And problem number two is 95% of our daily actions are unconscious. And so when we open our eyes each morning, hey, we're on autopilot most of the day, and we're innately wired to be fear-based and reactive. And that causes us innately when we wake up to sort of think about our problems, recent slides, and that stimulates that negative inner voice. And I'm just telling you, it's a lousy, ineffective way to live. And I should know, I've lived that way for 50 years. And you have nothing pulling you forward to your desired life. Now, here's what the solution is. It's feeding the succinct articulation of your desired life to yourself each day. And what that means is you define, here's exactly the person I want to be, exactly what I want to accomplish, and precisely how I'm going to achieve my clearly defined goals. And when you feed that to yourself every day, then the right actions happen automatically without thinking. And you have this powerful force pulling you forward to your desired life. And it only takes 12 minutes a day. Does that make sense?
It makes a ton of sense. It makes a ton of sense. And it also makes me think of some other, whether it be, science or books I've read, or, very much in line with, for example, Tony Robbins, whether you love him or hate him, right?
Yeah.
Being more intentional first thing in the morning and right. Stuff like that.
Well, we hear a lot about working smarter, people, well, what do you exactly, what do you mean? This is what working smarter is. And I saw throughout my career, and I love that your audience is entrepreneurs, is that you got to have something in life that is your advantage, that is your edge. Because if you don't, you're getting the average life. And I'm all about having the exceptional life and appreciating how precious life is. And so my edge is feeding the succinct articulation of my desired life myself each day. You follow that?
Yeah. Yeah. So John, other than going and reading Think and Grow Rich 20 times, what would you recommend? I guess number one is what were some of your key takeaways from the book? And number two is can we start talking about some of those, extra secrets that you kind of pulled out of it?
Yes, absolutely. Well, and let me roll into explaining the secret. And maybe the best way is to tell a story about how I discovered the secret. And so this, when I was 50 years old, and there was a little more going on with me than just feeling the scarcity of time. And so my mom was dying of pancreatic cancer as I'm turning 50. And so every day I would go to the hospital to see her, and she was in the hospital for like 8 weeks. I was living in Dallas at the time. And I just go see her. I hold her hand and love on her and spend an hour and a half, 2 hours with her. And Josh, it was everything I could do to keep from breaking down in front of her. And so every night I'd go see her, and then I'd walk out in the cold, dark hospital parking lot, get in my car and just cry my eyes out. And Josh, I'm telling you, I'm crying my eyes out like for 45 minutes, an hour every night. And this is going on for like 8 weeks. And I had never experienced this level of excruciating emotional pain. And obviously I was, grieving the impending loss of my mom, but I just knew there was something more to this. And what I realized, maybe not at the time, but I realized, I was just letting my mom down with my life, because my mom and dad gave me everything. They sent me to Jesuit high school in Dallas when they really didn't have the money. They sent me to the University of Texas, paid for everything. And so, Josh, as my mom is leaving this world, I'm reflective about my life. And I just saw that all I had to show for all the advantages they gave me was an average life. And I hated the average life because I just knew I was capable of so much more. But what I realize now is that frustration with my life as my mom was dying was like rocket fuel and causing me to go deeper into Think and Grow Rich than any other person on the planet ever had to figure out the full secret. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, and especially along the lines of, sometimes it's the bad things that feel bad and oftentimes are bad in the moment that kind of sparks the big stuff, right?
Right. Very good point. And so one night in particular during this time, I go to see my mom and, love on her, go in the hospital parking lot, cry my eyes out and start to drive home. But Josh, this night was different. It was snowing in Dallas. And as you may know, it does snow very often in Dallas. And so it just felt different. So as I'm driving home, I see those big snowflakes hit my windshield. And so I get home and I plop myself in my comfy chair and start to read Think and Grow Rich. And again, this is probably the 20th time I've read it. And this particular night, I read that your success in life comes down to your daily actions. The cumulative effect of your daily actions determine your success in each area of your life. I'm like, I never thought about success so simply, but I buy that. Then I read essentially that 95% of your daily thoughts and actions are unconscious. I'm like, that's interesting. And so now I'm ready to go to bed, and I wash my face and brush my teeth and put my little head on the pillow. And Josh, I'm laying there, and I can't stop thinking about what I just read, that 95% of your daily thoughts and actions are unconscious. And then it hits me, I don't control my daily actions, yet those daily actions are the very thing that determines my success. And that moment was like getting hit by lightning. And I remember sitting up in bed and, looking out in the backyard, and I see the snow falling, and it's like one of those surreal moments. And then I think, so, so what controls my daily actions then? If 95% of them are unconscious, hey, it's my subconscious mind. It's my autopilot. And the subconscious mind is only influenced by repetition. And what I start to realize, and I think this will relate to your audience, I've only been controlling my intentions with my conscious mind, not my actions, which are controlled by the subconscious mind. And really, Josh, that's when it all clicked. And I saw that I wasn't underperforming because I lacked intelligence or drive. Rather, I was underperforming because I had a false belief about success that I'd held for like 50 years. And that false belief was that I controlled my daily actions. And I dare say that every one of your audience has that same false belief. They think they control their daily actions when, in fact, the science says otherwise. And so finally, I realized that, hey, my autopilot and subconscious mind are controlling my daily actions. And without programming, I was innately wired to be fear-based or reactive and not in control of my actions. And as all of that sort of came into focus, then the secret of Think and Grow Rich came to me. And here's what it is. What you envision in detail with emotion on a daily basis is what shows up in your life. Now, let me say that again. What you envision in detail with emotion on a daily basis is what shows up in your life. And what that means is you create immense clarity about your life. You define exactly the person you want to be, exactly what you want to accomplish, and precisely how you're going to achieve your clearly defined goals. And then you put that clarity on a template I created, and which basically organizes the clarity in each area of your life. And then you feed that clarity to yourself each day. And it takes 12 minutes a day. And once you do that, then three things happen. The first thing that you experience is this immense sense of control over your life. Well, of course you would. You're feeding the succinct articulation of your desired life to yourself each day. Of course you'll feel control. And then the second thing you experience is confidence, because that's directly the result of the control you feel. And you also feel way less stressed because the mind thrives on order. And by feeding the succinct articulation of your desired life, you create this immense sense of order in the mind. And then the last thing you experience, and this takes approximately 21 days, it doesn't happen immediately. You've got to rewire your autopilot. But once you do, then the right actions happen automatically. And that's something you've probably never experienced before. And that's why you're playing the game of life at a much higher level than anybody else is.
Right. That's a lot to kind of take in. What I wanted to ask about, John, is how does the with emotion part play in? Because that all makes total sense and sounds great. And, we've all thought about or done some goal setting and stuff like that. What stuck out to me when you repeated that statement was with emotion. So can you talk a little bit about how that works?
Well, this is interesting. From my work as the mental coach for the 18 head coaches, I've been privy to meet some of the top sports psychologists in the world. And one of those sports psychologists was Trevor Moawad, who is Nick Saban's mental guy. And he taught me the idea that what you say out loud is 10 times more powerful than what you think. And so through my methodology, there are parts of my template that are highlighted where you will say that out loud instead of just reading it. And so, when you say it out loud, you can add that emphasis. And sometimes, you'll say the same one word twice just to really punch the emotion on it. So that's how that works.
I love it. I love it. So what should listeners who are really interested in what you're saying do next? Is it jumping on your website and grabbing that sheet, or what do you recommend here?
Well, let me give your listeners just one more little piece of science that I think will put a lot of this in perspective. And again, when you look at my story from big picture perspective, I see that I was blessed to have success because I finally understood how the human mind works. And it's amazingly simple. Here's how it works. Conscious mind sets your intentions and it's influenced by logic. Subconscious mind controls your daily actions, or 95% of them, and it's only influenced by repetition. It doesn't care about logic. And Josh, the classic example of this is, say you want to lose weight. Well, conscious mind sets the intention to lose weight based on the logic of the health benefits. But the reason people fail to lose weight is not from lack of intention. It's from lack of influencing their daily actions, which again are controlled by the subconscious mind. And that's why when you take and feed to yourself the succinct articulation of your desired life to yourself every day, and you're feeding what those right actions are, after 21 days, the subconscious mind accepts the programming and the right actions happen automatically. So you see how the science sort of fits together here?
Yeah, and the other thing that I'm kind of curious about too is, can you talk a little bit about those 12 minutes? Because number one, I'm just curious and interested now that you've given so much background and knowing how successful it's been. And number two is, I think maybe we've, a lot of us have dabbled with goal setting and, maybe morning journaling and stuff like that. So how is, and obviously I'll leave it up to you, how much you want to share on this episode or how much you want to tease out a little bit, but what do kind of those 12 minutes look like, and how hard is it, would you say, for people to really adopt that habit?
Well, that's a great question. And I love that your audience is entrepreneurs, and because what everybody's thinking is they're like, now, wait a minute, you 25x your income from 200 grand a year. How did you do that? Right? That's what people are really thinking. Well, let me explain this to you. Now, keep in mind, I told you I started out as a CPA, so I was very analytical. And so when I was blessed in my mid 50s to start making $5 million plus a year, I was like, wow, why is this happening? What is the difference today versus when I was making 200 grand a year for 20 years? And what I realized is it was really two things. The first thing was I could do 3 high performance skills that I could never do when I was in my 30s and 40s. And the first of those skills was being highly organized. And when I meet a lot of entrepreneurs today and I ask them, how organized are you? They'll tell me, well, I'm a 5 or a 6. That's not going to cut it. You're not going to be highly successful unless you're a friggin' 10. And to me, being a 10 means you plan your day the night before and you time block your days. And you just got to embrace that. And I have a simple system for being organized. So that's high performance skill number 1. Then the second high performance skill is this idea of taking time to just think, to deep think a couple of times a week. Now, this is a habit the top entrepreneurs in the world like Elon Musk and Bill Gates do. I mean, powerful skill to develop. And I have a simple 3-step process for that. And it takes just 30 minutes a couple times a week. Then the third thing is you got to be a conduit of learning. You got to have the wisdom of experts coming into your head. It's got to be consistent, and it's got to be strategic relative to what you want to accomplish. And probably if you're an entrepreneur, strategic means it better be about marketing. And so I see that in my 30s and 40s, I wasn't doing those three things, those three critical high performance skills. But I damn sure was when I was blessed to be making $5 million a year. But then the other thing that was going on is that I would feed to myself 6 things about my business every day. And this would be on the template. And I would articulate, here's my business plan. Here's my succinct strategy for success. Here's the 2 or 3 things that move the needle. Here's where I want my business to be 3 years from now. Here's the 4 or 5 milestones to get there. And then here's the linchpin issue to go to the next level. And so, Josh, when you feed that to yourself every day, you understand it deeper and deeper and deeper. And so it was that combination of being able to do the high performance skills coupled with understanding my business deeper and deeper. That's what took my income to 25 times what it was for the prior 20 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely makes sense. And I really like the intentionality and the thoughtfulness. When you were talking about the thinking piece, it also makes me think of Warren Buffett, right? Who apparently you would think that one of the richest men in the world, his schedule's packed. He's doing this, he's doing that. Right. Apparently he wakes up and most of his days there's nothing. And he goes in and he thinks and he researches and he takes the offensive, which is also, I think, a major takeaway I'm taking, instead of playing reactionary and defensive, he's
right.
Offensive.
Well, and that's a great point that you're making. I found that, my company was doing like 25 million in sales and had 175 employees. And I ultimately realized, obviously there's a lot going on here, but there's only a couple of things that move the needle. If we did the vast majority of stuff average, it didn't affect the bottom line. But by God, we had to do a great job on 2 or 3 things, and good wasn't good enough. It had to be great. Just the point I think you're making.
Absolutely. And also simplicity, right? Like boiling things down, which is, again, something that I'm kind of taking from a lot of what you're saying, maybe not said explicitly, but definitely taking it from a lot of what you're saying. So John, right. I mean, this has been great. Very, very thoughtful. It's giving me a lot of stuff to think about, which, I'm always excited when I have an episode that keeps me hopefully as engaged as our audience is, and leaving me with some to-dos. Like, for example, I need to reread Think and Grow Rich, number 1, because it's one of those books that was great. And usually what I like to do is when I read a great book, I try to reread it, maybe not 20 times in 3 months, but I at least try to reread it every couple of years. So, that's at the top of my list. What would you say, coming to the end of the episode what's the one message you would maybe leave with, especially a solopreneur? Maybe they're still working a full-time job. They have their side hustle or their dream to go out and pull the trigger. Or maybe they are, they have their small business. They're making $100K, $200K a year, kind of like you were. What's the one big message or last lesson you would kind of leave them with?
Well, let's create an epiphany with both you and your audience. You game for this?
I'm game.
Because I had an epiphany. And so, when I turned 50. And so, I want people that spent the time to listen to this interview to walk away with that same epiphany that changed my life. And so in my life, I see it in my adult life, I've had 3 epiphanies that have radically changed my life. And I'm sort of curious, Josh, how many of you had, if you had to think about it?
Whew. You're putting me on the spot here, John. I would say like no more than a handful. I mean, I'm, 34, just to kind of put.
Well, keep in mind, I hadn't had my first one until I was like in my late 40s. So, you're a youngster.
Well, I guess thinking about, what exactly qualifies as an epiphany.
Well, something that you learn it from somebody else, radically changes your life. And I love this conversation because if you ask me this when I was 34 years old, I would go, oh, I don't think I've had one. Well, let me create one for both you. So
Mm-hmm.
here's the epiphany that I got when I was 50 from reading Think and Grow Rich. 95% of my daily thoughts and actions are unconscious. 95% of my daily thoughts and actions are unconscious. And that was significant because as I told my story, I saw that my daily actions determine my success in each area of my life. So if 95% of them are unconscious, hey, I had to gain control over those unconscious daily actions. Otherwise, I was going to play the game of life at 5% of my potential. And if you want the exceptional life, that's just unacceptable. And so do you believe that? Do you believe that 95% of your daily thoughts and actions are unconscious?
Yeah, I mean, especially since you mentioned that earlier on in the episode, and I start to think about my life, then yeah, I can definitely agree.
So what are you doing about it?
Well, I mean, yeah, good. Well, you haven't given me enough time to go put this into action, John. I'm only listening to it now. I mean, in my case, I would say maybe it's not 95. Like, for example, I'm relatively organized. So like, for those of you watching
Right.
on YouTube, like you, I have, my daily to-do list. I'm a paper and pen guy. I manage my own calendar. So, maybe a little bit less than 95 for someone like myself, but probably not near as much as it should be or your day is.
Well, I think you're a great example. A lot of people sort of understand that most of their daily actions are unconscious. And of course, I had the benefit of learning it. The moment I learned that my daily actions determine my success, I also learned that 95% of them were unconscious. So it was easy to sort of connect the dots. And that's the point maybe I wanted to make with you is it, but you're not doing anything about it because that's what we're trying to do is connect the dots right now. And let me show you something that's cool because to some people, this is all new. Watch what I can do with Chat GPT. This will sort of blow you away. G, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. What can I help you with?
So I understand that 95% of a person's daily thoughts and actions are unconscious. Is that really true?
Yes, it's a common concept in psychology. Most of our daily actions and thoughts happen automatically because they're driven by habits and unconscious processes. This allows us to focus our conscious mind on more complex tasks.
So,
What make
yes, that does make sense. So another question. I understand what's really going on is that you first take an action unconsciously, and then a couple of milliseconds later, you become aware of it. Is that true?
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Your brain often initiates actions based on unconscious processes, and then your conscious mind becomes aware of them shortly after. This is why some actions feel almost automatic.
So, Josh, the significance of that is a lot of people will go, well, wait a minute. I'm conscious of everything I do. And so none of my actions are unconscious. Well, I can see why you think that. It's sort of counterintuitive. But as the science is proven, you're taking the action unconsciously, and then a nanosecond later, you're becoming aware of it. But the point I'm trying to make is the action itself, which is determining your success, was taken unconsciously. And this methodology that I'm teaching is what happens is it doesn't make more of your unconscious actions conscious. It just gives you control over those unconscious actions to make the right actions happen automatically. When you feed the succinct articulation of your desired life to yourself each day, that's the effect, is it makes the right actions happen unconsciously. And so am I creating an epiphany for you? Is this coming together?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is emails, because, and this is kind of like a great time for me to have you as a guest, because I'm thinking about a lot of this stuff right now, which is, so I can relate to you in the sense that you started your career as a CPA. I'm a lawyer in Canada, and some of these files that I'm working on are very back and forth, largely over email. And sometimes I'll catch myself working on something super important, and then, the email ding goes off, and I can't help myself, and I take a look, and then I open the email, and it's not urgent or important, but then I'm too invested, and I go down a rabbit hole, and 30 minutes later, I answered an email that wasn't even that important. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's things like that are popping into my head about, hey, am I working efficiently? Am I, doing a lot of the things that you talked about? So it's given me a lot to think about.
Right. Well, and I think that what happens with people, some people are going to hear what we just said, and it's going to be that epiphany in this moment. They're going to go, wow, I've never known this. This all makes sense. I see that I absolutely have to take control of my unconscious daily actions. And some of them, life, hopefully, is changed right now. But some people are going to need just a little more time to process what we've covered, because we've covered a lot. And so I'm sort of curious, from your standpoint, have you had the epiphany that I was hoping you would have?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think it's one of those things that makes so much sense and is so obvious once you've heard it the way you've explained it, right? It's like, oh yeah,
Right.
well, I can clearly look back on certain days and say, holy crap, I woke up that day and was just dragged from task to task because of, unconscious, this happened and I just did it, not necessarily because it was the actions that were going to move the needle the most towards my actual goals. So yeah, I mean, listen, this is also good timing, because I'm building two businesses right now and juggling them and prioritizing them and figuring out the most efficient way to grow both. Is top of mind. So yeah, I mean, this is great, John. Definitely one of the episodes that I'll come back to again and again as well, because it's, even once you realize this, I find that, number one, I need to check out your checklist to start putting it into action. And number two, one of these things that I now don't want to forget, right? I want to make sure it's top of mind.
Right. Well, one thing that I meant to say that your audience will find interesting. So a lot of them will go, yeah, that idea of feeding the succinct articulation of my life to myself each morning as my morning routine is a good idea. And then they go, well, wait, I'm not sure I understand the clarity he's talking about regarding each area of my life. Well, I've got a way to fix that. I created an AI algorithm that all you got to do is answer 50 questions. Then you press a button, and 10 seconds later, my template is customized to your life. It makes it super simple. And one other thing I might say that you would find interesting, because the audience is entrepreneurs. A few years ago, I decided I was going to go show this to the top expert in the world on success, who, in my opinion, is Darren Hardy. Do you know who Darren Hardy is?
No.
Well, he was a publisher of Success magazine for 10 years. Brilliant guy. He's about 50 years old. Truly brilliant. And so I really just wanted to meet the top expert in the world on success, whoever he or she might be, because I want to see, is there something similar to what I've got? Is there flaws in it? I just wanted the candid opinion. So I write a big check, and Ginger and I fly out to California, which, oh, by the way, using this methodology, I met my wife within 2 years of using it, which was even better than the money. And so we meet with Darren, and the moment comes, and I show him this template, and he looks at it and he goes, wow, this is really good. But he goes, John, people are not going to spend 12 minutes a day on this. And I'm like, whoa, how can that be? It was 25x my income. Time Magazine did a cover story on the science behind it, and we're applying the central concepts of the top book of the world on success. People applying. I mean, what do you mean they're not going to spend 12 minutes a day on it? And he goes, John, the dirty little secret in the success business is that most people, more success is merely a preference, merely a preference. It's not a necessity. And he says, that's 98% of people. And he says, what you've got is only for the 2% of people that are driven. And the effect of that moving forward was, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to find more guys like me that are making a couple $100,000 a year and want to make $1 million, and I'm going to teach it to them. And so I do that. I even give them a money back guarantee to really lure them in, where if I couldn't double their income within a year, I give them their money back. And I typically charge them $20,000. And over 8 weeks, I teach them the course, and they get a 35 or 40 to 1 return on their money over 3 years. And so, but then it evolved after I'd done about 10 of them and documented every one of them. I'm like, the leverage way for me to go forward is to license my methodology to coaches and just to write a book and teach it that way. So, but that was very enlightening to me.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone's of the same breed, right? And
Right.
you see that a lot, definitely, especially as you, in my opinion, get a little bit older and network with more people and talk to more people and understand how they operate and kind of what their operating system is. So yeah,
Well,
I mean, that definitely makes a lot of sense to me. So John, I mean, this has been great. Very, very enlightening episode. I've learned a lot. There's a lot of actions I want to take, including thinking and other types of stuff based on what
Right.
we've talked about. For anybody listening who is interested in what they've heard, maybe they want to get your checklist, maybe they want to get in touch, maybe they want to learn more, where do you recommend that they go?
Well, I did a special video for your listeners. It's a 9-minute video that fully explains the secret of Think and Grow Rich and science behind it that we've talked about. And it's obviously free. And so just go to themissingsecret.org, themissingsecret.org. And you can get that video. And then if that intrigues you further, you can buy my book. And it's called The Missing Secret of the legendary book, Think and Grow Rich. And one final thing, can I share one final thought on this?
Yeah, of course.
So this happened a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. I became a grandfather for the first time. And we go over to my stepdaughter's house the day after the baby is born. And Josh, there's a lot of oohing and eyeing over the baby. And for some reason, Ginger and Hannah hand me the baby. And then they walk away. And so I'm holding this 1-day-old little girl, and I feel her close to my chest and the warmth of her body. And Josh, I start having tears flowing down my face because I realized how precious her life is and how she's going to live to be 100 years old. And the quality of her life and the success of her life is going to come down to the thoughts that are going on in her head most of the time. And so I'm like, I am by God going to impact the thoughts going on in her head with my methodology. But the lesson for your audience is your life is precious. Your life is precious. And when you put your head on the pillow tonight, just think about your life. If the next 5 years are like the last 5 years, will you be satisfied with that? And if you're not, stop winging life. You've now learned a way to do life. That's literally what my methodology is, a way of doing life. And so again, change your life by having an actual way of doing it.
That's a great note to end on. We had our first child in January of this year. And so, your story, thank you. Your story definitely hits home. It was the first grandchild for both of our parents. So, I'm sure they can maybe relate to a little bit of what you said. John, this has been great. We're going to include a link to that website that you mentioned in the description, whether you're listening on your favorite podcast platform or you're watching on YouTube. John, thanks again for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure.